This had no right to be as good as it was. The First Omen is the directorial debut of Arkasha Stevenson, one of a few similarities with another recent movie, Monkey Man, which sees Dev Patel step into the director's chair for the first time. The posters for both of these movies also happen to be very eerily similar to one another. This movie is a prequel to the 1976 classic The Omen from Richard Donner, which is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Admittedly, I didn't expect this movie to be good. I wasn't impressed with any of the marketing. I didn't see how a prequel so many years later could justify its existence, and simply put, there haven't been many spiritual horror films, especially ones focused on the Catholic Church and nuns in particular, that I have enjoyed lately. Only a couple weeks ago, we got Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney, and while I thought it was okay, it didn't really do anything at all to impact me or impress me in any way, and this movie looked like a lot of the same. That's why it surprises me to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. And honestly, if we didn't live in a world where Dune Part 2 existed, this would likely be my favorite movie of the year. To start, the movie looks beautiful. It's shot in a very delicate manner that highlights the scenery of the Italian landscape, and as it goes along and things get more interesting, the cinematography also adapts to the chaos, becoming more rough and dirty in its presentation. It's also just framed incredibly well. There are certain sequences to where the camera is focused directly on the shadows or a character spread out on a bed for a long period of time, and the camera just sits there with the subject centered directly in the middle of the frame. And it creates this effect that's very unsettling because you're not exactly sure what's going to happen, but you know it's not going to be good. And aesthetically, the way the movie was constructed, it feels very in line with the original. It captures the 70s style without ever coming off as gimmicky or cheap. The high production value is all over this thing. It's obvious they didn't take the easy route here. There was a lot of time spent on making this look like a good movie, which is something that often feels lost in big studio horror movies nowadays. The sound design is also incredible. I saw The First Omen at a late night screening in Dolby, and I think that definitely benefited my experience because this movie does a lot with its sound design to build tension and atmosphere. You'll hear whispers in the background that feel like they're coming from right beside you. And every big moment is jolted by loud screeches or stringed instrument cues, and it makes a lot of moments that would have otherwise came off as familiar feel more threatening. And the score is so strong. The composers found a way to incorporate plenty of new pieces that feel very in line with the original, but also intersperse the original theme from Jerry Goldsmith. The sound plays very much as a character in and of itself and helps with building the atmosphere all the way around. I keep mentioning atmosphere. Very early on, the movie has a dreadful feel to it, and that only builds as the story progresses. Even when things happening aren't terrifying in nature, there's a presence that makes you feel very uncomfortable, and for me, it was almost like there was this heavy weight on my chest that kept pressing down harder and harder. Movies like this really don't scare me much, and there's nothing necessarily in this movie that I haven't seen before in some capacity, but it's the way that it was presented that made it so effective. There are images within this movie that just won't escape my mind, and moments that rocked me harder than I ever could have anticipated. It's not a pleasant movie. It's very dreadful. And it's all sold incredibly well by a star-making performance from Nell Tiger. She's a newer name in the industry, but I previously enjoyed her work in M. Night Shyamalan's Servant series on Apple TV+. She easily gives the most captivating performance in that show, so I was curious to see how she'd do in a major lead role, and she's just excellent. Her character starts off as someone who is very hopeful. She's devout and very passionate about her faith, but quickly, as things begin to unravel and the more disturbing elements come into play, all of her hope is sucked out of her. We see her spiral into paranoia and fear, and she has to go to a lot of very dark places. This is a very demanding role that requires her to go to some massive extremes, but never for a moment was she not up for it. And honestly, I think she gives the best performance, not just in a horror movie, but as a whole of the entire year. And the more I think about it, I don't think I've been more captivated by a female lead performance in a horror movie since I was when I saw Toni Collette in Hereditary. Unfortunately, much like Collette, I don't see Nell Tiger receiving any sort of awards recognition because the horror genre is still very overshadowed by voting committees, and it's a real shame because I can name countless examples when horror movies have done things better across the board, especially talking about the lead performances. But there's a major stigma around those movies that we still can't seem to shake. I think this movie does a great job at establishing the lore and creating that connective tissue that segues perfectly into the original, but that's also where my problems lie. The ending of this movie is very baffling to me. While watching, it seemed like there was a perfectly good ending put in place, and I was very satisfied with it, and then it just keeps going. It's unclear if they're trying to set up a prequel franchise of sorts or some sort of branch that will coexist with the original storyline, but it just felt a bit silly and kind of undermined the rest of what the movie was going for. And honestly, if it weren't for the last 5 minutes, my rating would probably be a lot higher than it is. But overall, this movie really surprised me and not only ended up being better than I expected, but also one of my favorite movies of the entire year so far. It's an example of how a horror prequel should be made and proof that if the right people with the right intentions are involved, we can still get a good studio horror movie. I think it extends its reach a little bit too far in the very end, but that doesn't take away from all of the moments that really worked for me. So with all that being said, I'm gonna have to give The First Omen an 8 out of 10. Wow, I never thought I'd be saying that. So guys, make sure to comment down below. Let me know if you've seen this movie and give me your thoughts and opinions on it. Also tell me, are you a fan of The Omen? Like I said, that is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, so I'd like to get your opinion on it as well. And if you would, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.